Tell me
Yeah.
like I'm a 5-year-old, what's happening to my data? How would you explain that,
Yeah.
Brian?
This is where I think you and I talked about previously, the notion of connectivity, So if you think about the apps that are on your phone, everybody's kind of familiar with that, right? I've got
Right.
apps on my phone, but there are connections between those apps. And the fact that we now all are connected 24/7, everybody's got either cellular data or Wi-Fi. And also, this came along with the move to the cloud.
As we set the stage here, Brian, is I want to do something that you think would be the ultimate story of why APIs really matter for the business owner. But let's we can start with your, just an intro of who you are, why you do what you do, why you love what you do. And I really want this podcast to be about breaking down barriers. And I think that a big part of the barriers, and I'm really excited to have you on to talk about this with me because I spent some time, of course, with banks and credit unions, a long amount of time, and they don't even know really how their experiences kind of truly get built and the user interfaces that their customers or members are using. But then you kind of come down market into, businesses that want a website, that want their social media, that want to be able to optimize what's happening on Facebook and those messages that I get and what's coming in from my website and then coming into my email and then all these calendar links for all these scheduling. And I can't have a seamless experience. And so I think that that's what I see as a burden or a lock, a barrier or a bottleneck to commerce, right? Where they're just trying to exchange their value. And that's what this particular mission of mine is to really let's have conversations that educate the small business owner that really help to break things down. So let's start with who you are first, and then we can go from there.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I'm Brian Otten. I have been in IT, well, since 1993. I was one of those people that did a degree, a BA in a non-tech related thing, subject, which was history, because I always loved history, English. I never was never really a math and science kind of guy. And then I always loved geography. So I got into a job my last year at Boston University, which was the U.S. Census Bureau. So that was 1989. They were gearing up for the 1990 census. And a bunch of buddies of mine and I, we just got a job at the Census Bureau, and it was like a night shift, and we were digitizing maps so that the enumerators for the census could use the maps. You can imagine the change that happens between one census and another. All of the new neighborhoods, the population changes. So they have to really get that in place so that it could facilitate the collection of the census. And the census is important to understand how the country's changing, how people are moving across the country. The United States is a huge country with freedom of mobility, right? So, and a lot of that mobility is driven by where the economic activity is. And that stuff really, really interested me. For the first time, I thought, wow, you've got geography plus technology in the forms of this digitizing of maps and the digital collection of data. And I thought, this is cool. You can actually do a degree in this. The degree was a master's in geographical information systems. At the time, I was planning a move to the UK as well. So I did my degree. I ended up getting accepted to the MSc, Master of Science program at Leicester University in the middle of England. And that's really how I got into technology and into IT. And I always was concerned about the human geography side of things and the tech and the applications that I then went on to work with in my first job were a lot about market analysis and population demographics for small businesses and large businesses alike to understand their customers. So a lot of the stuff you said, Connie, about how do we as a business understand what customers want, be able to say yes to them, like respect what they need, and balance out that need for profit with innovation and giving them really good customer service. All of that stuff, I entered into that through this world of like technology, market analysis, geodemographic analysis, and it was fascinating. So it was a good
That's
start for me.
That's super cool because you were at the beginning of the bridge of one size fits all to holy cow, we've got all this human migration happening in between states. People are deciding where they want to live and they're moving, and they've always done that over history. And you see them picking up and moving for jobs and for school and for
Yeah,
family life and work
yeah.
life balance. And you're watching it all happen through the evolution of the Census Bureau.
Hmm. Yeah,
Super cool.
yeah, yeah. It was really cool.
So
Um,
tell me how you really realize the power of this data shifting, and I call them data transformation
yep.
journeys, because data, every time that we do a thing on a website or on a social media, there's data that's changing hands. And how did you really get into the understanding of all of that data movement through social media and user interfaces?
Yeah. So as I continued my career, I did consulting work independently. And so I got to see the way a lot of businesses manage data, and it wasn't very good. I remember, this is kind of an evolution. Companies had systems that they built in order to do a specific set of business tasks, or do something for the customer, or do something for their field or their staff. And that it doesn't matter whether it's financial, healthcare, supply chain, manufacturing. It all has to be supporting some kind of business processes to get stuff done. So I was always fascinated by the data side of it. But what kind of struck me is that a lot of the focus back in those days was on databases, like the storage of data. It's like, we got to have a database and we have to put stuff in the database and, we were using things like Cognos. And if you remember those days, like, business insights and in business intelligence platforms and things like that. So everybody was focused on the data, data, data. And that's great. And it's great to say, oh, we're a data-driven company. We make our decisions based on insights, because there's a lot of analytics you could place on top of all that data. But I always knew that there was just something more. Like I got into things like the semantic web. There were
Mm,
things like, RDF and ontologies. My concern was always trying to make sense of the data, because if you don't understand all of the metadata, all of the provenance of the data, where it's coming from, you then lead into another topic, which is trust. So trusting that data. So you can get insights, you can do analytics, you can store it in the best databases you've got, but it's now about, okay, but how do we make sense of that? And then how do we have value, enrich the data? Because we also saw at that time just an explosion of data sources. So that's another driver, I think, to get control or to understand the data, because there's so much of it, and you need to trust it. And so those are two pillars of data management that I saw a lot of companies just not doing very well, not getting a handle on. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, we were also in the 90s, like you said. I can remember, we were trying to figure out how to move information. I mean, I was always been in money movement. So how do we understand who's moving what money and for why? And, there was business owners back then. There was individual customers paying for things, and the data to market to a customer. We were also at the beginning of, the social media platforms too in the 90s. And you go from, obviously we were in Web 1, may have been just kind of leaning into Web 2, which is where Facebook, and you had what was the one, the space, what was that one called?
MySpace.
MySpace. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
the
MySpace.
first of the chat platforms were. So all of this unstructured data was really starting to kind of flood in. And
Yeah,
what do we
yeah,
do with all this stuff? All
yeah,
these people's opinions and people's chat conversations, and where does it all go? And a lot of it just kind of got compressed into a database and
yeah,
didn't really get used for understanding, to your point, what do the customers want.
yeah,
We knew we wanted to offer them, rewards and really cool experiences to get them to come back, but we didn't really know how to segment into the individual markets of unique customer communities in order to really incent them based on how they wanted to be talked to. It was a one size fits all.
Yep.
So tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about how that journey continued.
Yeah. Yeah. You just made me think about how you've now got lots of islands of data. And so a
Right.
lot of the technology was focused then on integration, right? So everybody used that I word. And that's really how I started getting into data governance, but also on the tech side. So at some point, I moved into um, the vendor world, right? So I had been working, like you mentioned, you worked at banks, building societies. I had worked at large banks, a couple of large banks in London, and saw how a large company with lots of different lines of business had, even within those companies, islands of data that they needed to integrate. Okay. Um, then with the social media, with all of these, we might call them fintechs or health techs, a lot of technology companies, smaller companies, filling in gaps where maybe larger companies don't have the capabilities. And so that even made integration even more important. But then I started to think, well, integration is like kind of a means to an end. What is it really all about? It's really about, I would call it orchestration. It's like the orchestra conductor. How do you have technology that allows us to take data, all the stuff we just talked about, enrichment, making value, getting analytics out of it, allowing the combination of data from your outside partners, letting them do some of the work, so it starts to expand. And we have the concept of like opening everything. So now a business has to really open the doors and almost become data providers. So I think there was a switch where a lot of companies were using this data for their own needs, but now there became a need to become a data provider, where previously you might not have been a data provider. And that has a lot of responsibilities. And it comes back again to the responsibilities of protecting that data, securing it, making sure you know where it comes from, making sure you can trust it. And you talked about at one point, data democratization is like, then who owns the data? And that's now the world we're getting in, especially when you add the layer or the lens of social media. Big
Because
companies, big platforms collecting all of this, you voluntarily, willfully giving it over. So now who owns it
well, and
and
I
who
don't know that,
controls it?
I mean, if people really understood what they're really giving up as they're commenting on posts and sharing a bad day or getting, ticked off at something that they
Right.
experienced in their life and posting about it, that data is now out there for all of these data providers to potentially pick up and use,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And, I think if we all understood and just really slowed down to really understand, it's my data, it's your data, it's our data is being used for decisions and products and services to be created so that marketing messages can be created, so that people can be grouped in communities and said, oh, these people all look the same. So let's send them that
Hmm.
message.
Yep.
And we can, create products that might help someone buy, something that they can't afford, right? And we worry about the different types of communities that don't really understand what's happening with their data that they're just, arbitrarily typing into their phone or their device. Where is it going?
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
So, what do you think is a great way to kind of help someone that's not very sophisticated with the knowledge of this technology? Because a lot of people, like, they glaze over when you say technology or infrastructure or dashboards. And like, what are you talking about? Tell me, like, I'm a 5-year old, what's happening to my data? How would you explain that, Brian?
Yeah. This is where I think you and I talked about previously, the notion of connectivity. So if you think about the apps that are on your phone, everybody's kind of familiar with that, right? I've got apps on my phone, but there are connections between those apps. And the fact that we now all are connected 24/7, everybody's got either cellular data or Wi-Fi, and also this came along with the move to the cloud, right? Because the other thing that was happening was that the expense and the cost of running all of this stuff. People, I think, forget. in this world of cloud computing, and now we haven't even talked about AI, which I'm sure we'll get to, because you can't have a conversation without it these days. But people, think like, where is all this happening? It's still running on hardware, right? It's still got to be running somewhere. And that was the rise of the data center. So I think for people, just understanding that your phone, your computer has connections, right? And the connections are just like the connections in your body, whether it's nerves or blood, circulatory system. That's data. That's information. And so, what are the connecting pieces? That's how I really got into the world of APIs, because you need easy ways to connect all of this decentralized, distributed world together. So I would say, when you're clicking on your app, even if it's like, getting a ride share from one of your rideshare apps or something, that's calling APIs. APIs have been around for decades, but it became a lot easier for developers to start using APIs once standards came in, and the internet protocols, like HTTP came in.
Are you saying APIs are a computer language? What are
So
they?
APIs are really something you build, right? They're a front door. Think of it as like a design that fronts a service. So the world is kind of full of running services, doing stuff for you, and those applications are calling out to those services.
So you're giving them instructions.
They're
instructions.
Yeah, they're instructions. They are really packaged up capabilities. I like to say APIs are packaged up capabilities for your company or for you as a consumer to get something done, to do something. And I mentioned orchestration because it's it's often just not one API, right? You'd have to build like the gigantic, Uber, and I don't mean the company, but like the God API, that does everything in a decentralized world. To make things efficient, to make them repeatable, you have to have services. And so that's the other thing that happened along with the cloud revolution, is that, hey, we're not going to build these gigantic monolithic applications anymore. We're going to build services, and we're going to use APIs as the little connectors, but they're better than just maybe like a technical interface that nobody really knows what's in it. APIs are great because they've got good documentation. They've got a high reuse capability. They describe the data that you need to give it and get something back out of it. So that was a real revolution in taking what was something that was already around, which are system interfaces, and turning them into something called APIs, which really are the connectors. Really, it's how all of your applications do their thing, right?
So if I'm in, my digital banking app, or I'm in Uber, or one of these apps that are pretty mainstream, and I check a box, I say I want to submit something, I put in a little bit of information, but things are getting faster, right? I don't have to do as many clicks. I don't have to do as much data entry. But every time I'm interacting with that app, you're saying that there's instructions from me going through those buttons and features in the app, and then there's an instruction guide that the developer of that app has already read and has already programmed into the receiving side on the back end of that app in the phone. That information goes through the Wi-Fi into that program for the application, whatever that app is called, and then it continues on its way. How many types of APIs do you think an average app is sending in a single interaction with me, a human being?
Wow. Yeah, it really depends on the complexity, but just the examples you've given there, it could be anywhere from, 5 to 10 to 20, right? Because you think about it, first I need to get your profile, then I need to get, and maybe kind of cache or make it available for quick access, some of your recent trips, right? So now you've got 1, 2, 3 different APIs, one to get trips, one to get your profile, one to get your preferences. Then you're getting into the other set of capabilities where, okay, now I want to book a ride. Okay, use an API to get the prompts from you or where you want to go, right? And use another GPS or geolocation API to connect with a service that tells me where you are using the location services of your phone. So you start adding these things up, and it's like, wow, this could be like 20 APIs just to book a ride. And it's easier than doing 20 different obtuse or like things that you can't really, a developer can't understand. They have to have full understanding of each one of those systems, right? Think of the APIs as being like a layer above those systems that makes it easier for the developer to get it to you and for the application to call to get the information back and forth.
The reason I asked that question that way, Brian, is because I know that, sometimes as business owners, we look at the cost to launch a new website, the cost for a custom website versus one of the, drag and drop type of website platforms that you can just go on yourself and manage yourself. And we're not taking into account the value that the programmers like you have had to spend time learning all those instruction booklets for the different APIs in order to make a code turn into what we as a business owner envision in our mind. And
Right.
so we're exchanging value with the developer, and we want to compensate the developer for the value of these apps that they're building, sometimes on a small scale, sometimes on a big enterprise scale, like the types of companies that you and I have worked for before. So I only ask that question to really help us appreciate one another for the value that we bring to the different types of roles with technology and our expectations for what happens to that technology when it's done being built. And then now I change something in my business and I want it to change and mirror my process in person with my technology. And I mentioned that at the beginning is I want to change this. I want to introduce a new product, but now I have to wait for my webmaster to make a change in my website so that it reflects what I want it to do in person.
Right.
And I think we have to remember to appreciate one another in that value of exchange and the time and the expertise that's involved.
Yep.
Because to do it ourselves, that's a lot of time too. Let's talk about vibe coding and AI because let's talk a little bit about even still you have to still take in some information and responsibility to understand what you're actually touching with AI. You might be having a conversation and it's spitting something out, but what are we doing with all of that value exchange that we used to have with humans listening to one another and making the thing turn out the other side of that process?
Yep.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's critical. And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking about things like APIs or, business services, technology services as just pure technical things. But what you just highlighted is the fact that more people need to be involved at the beginning stage. I call like the definition stage of when you're building a new application or a new set of services or some features. Maybe like you said, you're a credit union, you want to build some services for your members on your mobile app. And that's where I think a lot of companies struggle because the business people are like, well, that's tech stuff, right? And I don't know about you, this is something I'm wondering about is in this digital age, I don't think that's really an excuse anymore is for people to say, well, I don't understand that stuff. That's a techie stuff. My IT team builds that for me. I mean, you just articulated it. It's like, what if I want to do it myself? Like, I want to go faster with this. I want to have more control over what the end product looks like. Again, APIs make it really easy or a lot easier for those kind of business product people to get involved or even the customers getting involved because it's already packaging up a lot of the technical data management, security, who's authorized and authenticated to get the data. So again, that's where I think APIs are really, really revolutionary because, it's done a lot of that work for you. And that is the driving factor. And I think a lot of companies don't get their business people involved early enough. And they don't give business people enough credit for understanding the tech side of things.
I always used to say when I used to do what we called requirements gathering, right? And that
Yeah.
was the listening to the business people say, I want, this is my objective. This is what I want to have happen, and you really have to listen, and it's very similar to human conversation, is what are your needs and what can I do to help you meet those needs? What's the capabilities of the technology? And no different than what's my capabilities as a person interacting with you so that we can meet in the middle and compromise on what is doable, what's feasible.
Right.
So those
Right.
feasibility conversations are very important. I completely agree with you. And if individual business leaders don't allow the individuals that are on the front lines really working with the customers or documenting things in a way that is almost storytelling. I call it
Yeah.
storytelling,
Yeah.
right? We have to do customer journey maps. And the
Yes. Yeah.
customer journey
Yeah. Yeah.
maps are a best practice. Even when I was, helping a small marketing firm, it was always about what do you want the outcome to be? What do you want the experience for your customer to be? What do you want them to have? What kind of communication interactions with you, and at what stages do you want them to have? And those are things that the tech isn't going to know automatically. We
Right.
have to
Right.
create that. We have to program the tech to do that.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. And again, I think APIs are great because you can design something that doesn't really even have to have a system behind it yet, right? An API, like I explained, is it's just a front door. It's a description or a definition of what am I going to give? What am I going to get? Now, doesn't that sound kind of like a value exchange or a value proposition? So I think of APIs not just these little technical Lego bricks or whatever, although that is a good analogy, but I think of them as just units of value exchange.
Mhm.
Um,
And when we talk about digital transformation, which was the big words in those were the buzzwords in the 90s and the 2000s, as everybody was trying to go from brick and mortar to online,
mhm.
we were seeing retail experiences start in on the online environment, but then things getting picked up in the store. That was kind of that new explosion of, buy now and pick up at the store or delivery. Those were all happening through these websites that were facilitating some of that human interaction. I think what's really interesting, though, is how did we see humans kind of creating barriers because they didn't understand the tech? What's one of the stories that you remember that way?
Creating barriers. Yeah, I think it goes back to trust. Like one of the
Mm,
biggest barriers was trust. I worked for a company. This was the geodemographics company. So we had a division in the company or a department that would do geodemographic um, reports. And we had a desktop system that I worked on, where we had all the maps, and it was such fun. I mean, there was such great, really interesting applications. Then the internet came on. Now we had a bureau service, so people would actually phone in and give the requirements. So we had people who were writing down, okay, I'm interested in this postal area. I'm looking to, build a new leisure center or whatever, and I need reports. Like I need what's the propensity to buy X or drive this distance to go to this, gym or whatever it is. They wanted to understand the market, at that kind of demographic level. And then someone would take that, probably write it down, and then we'd run the reports and post the mail, like send them in the mail, right? Then it became email, right? And then sending them out. And I was saying, why don't we have it like a self-service thing where, again, breaking it into a service with some APIs that would allow someone out there to do that without having to, spend the time, because it takes a long time to do that. But if they could get self-service, I think that was a key. Is like, can they get self-service? And I remember my director at the time was like, how do we do that? Well, I said, well, we could put it online on the internet. We could have an app that does that. They could come to it, get an account. It's like, I don't know. The internet's for nerds. Um,
hearing that it's for nerds. I'm hearing it's for business owners and for everyday
yeah, yeah.
people. And they really have a choice and an opportunity to learn about these. So what's a simple way for someone to understand what their technology is capable of? If I choose Stripe and I choose GoDaddy for a website or Squarespace, like I'm building something that's really already kind of been preconceived and built and put into a box for me as a business owner to choose from. That's one choice. Or I really need to lean into a company and ask lots of questions to make sure that the tech that they're developing for me meets the needs that I have for I have to be thinking about the sequences of my business, right? Protocols, standard operating procedures, whatever the procedures are.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
other ways could you envision somebody educating themselves a little bit more?
Yeah, I would think about the whole chain. Like I said, think about the data exchange that is required on both sides, and don't forget to add the customer into that. This is why I think one of the most exciting areas at the moment is what's been called open banking or open finance, because as a business, you as a financial services company, whether you're a bank or credit union or wealth management company, you're handling your customers' financial data. This isn't just like my tennis club information or whatever. This is people's financial data, right? This is important stuff to be protected. So there's the aspect of understanding what your responsibilities are as a business to protect it. But at the same time, you're under pressure now to make it possible for your customers to do more with that data, right? So let's say you, Connie, I don't want to have to go to 20 different financial services apps on my phone and try and piece together a picture of what my financial situation is. I want to use a credit app. I want to see my accounts on my credit union because maybe I have a car loan with them. I want to see my core banking stuff. Maybe I've got a CD with a credit union. Companies have sprung up over the last few years, like I would say the last 5 years, that aggregate all of that data. And so now everyone in that chain has to be aware of what the interactions are to get to that point where you can say, hey, look at this. I've got all of my accounts. I can see everything here, all my credit cards, that's not magic. It's happening because companies are collaborating on a way of doing this that's repeatable, secure, and allows innovation to happen, right?
Right, right. And I
So
think that that's also a good example of the collaboration just by us being customers and talking about, what features we like. I mean, there are tons of user forums that you can get involved in. You can, send feedback and send information about the features that you like, the features that you don't like. And hopefully the business brands that you're doing business with are really listening and
right,
saying, yeah, there's something, because that's where I think that, shutting customers down and not listening to their user experiences as they interact with your brand, that can really become a blocker for you doing business with them in the future. And so whether it's, good feedback or not feedback, I mean, we have, people that say, tell me that the baby is ugly, or, if something that you're really passionate about isn't working for you as a customer, I'm not going to sell that thing to you. That widget's not going to sell. So, no different than we try to create, marketing messaging and put the marketing message out there, we still need to understand our customer,
yep,
even if we're building a new process.
yeah, yeah. I
So,
mean, there are so many different aspects to that, and in the digital world, one of the things back in the old analog world, I talked about my journey from market analysis. It was really only possible to do that in the physical world. Where did someone come from? Did we capture their card swipe at the register? All of that kind of stuff. When you're building your digital future, you got to think about both the responsibility that I talked about of security and all of that, but now you have an opportunity digitally to start to piece together what people like, what they don't like. So there's a whole new opportunity, in the digital world to understand, what people are interested in, what's a hit, what are they spending time on, and you can experiment faster and innovate faster and not really take on as much risk if something just fails, right? I think we moved past the days of like these gigantic IT projects where we're banking everything on this, but by the time it gets delivered, I'm sure you've been part of those too. It's like, 2 years down the line, things have already changed, right? So we're now in a world where it's moving so fast. You just got to try stuff. You just got to get stuff in place and then quickly see if the interaction is there. And again, having the systems like APIs that are tracking, logging all the different interactions within your applications because they're services, then you stand a chance of understanding the consumption and the adoption. And I think adoption is a key metric for any kind of like digital product manager.
Yeah. Well, thank you for, I really think that this was hopefully as granular level as like for a 5th graders, we could make it, trying
Yeah.
to simplify a topic such as APIs. I do think that humans tend to kind of put up their own resistance when it comes to tech. And, we're in a world where, yes, we can do a lot of things still in person, but we are leaning on technology more and more. And, I think that there's a ton of value out there with individuals that are putting their time and effort into studying technology like yourself, that have, meaningful information to exchange. And we need to honor that in each other. And I think we can collaborate and learn how to do that. And just everybody is connected and has a part to play. And we have expertise that we can all share in when we're working together.
Yeah.
So thank you
It's
for
exciting.
spending some time with me, Brian. I appreciate that. Do you have any other closing thoughts for unlocking commerce when it comes to APIs?
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating discussion. I love talking about this stuff, and I think that last point, thinking about how data is used, respecting the fact that people, if you have data about customers, you got to respect the security of that data, and I think technologies that I know we both are interested in, things like blockchain technology. Things that will give the control of the data back into the hands of the people who rightfully have it, I think are going to be very exciting in the next couple of years.
I agree. I think that people are demanding that so that we can restore trust as a community. So,
Totally
all
agree.
right. Well, with that said, thank you. This is a wrap on this particular episode. Thanks for joining
Connie.
us, Brian. It was great to
Anytime.
chat with you.
Okay, talk to you soon. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.